It's been a while. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a video on YouTube. I was busy. I've been busy ever since the incident. Today I wanted to talk about this video that I saw months ago and it's just been bothering me. I made a TikTok about it and it did surprisingly well, and ever since then I've been wanting to make a full-length video about it, and I just haven't because of the incident. The video in question is titled, "Is Wokeness Killing the Marvel Franchise?" It's a video from the Daily Wire, which if you don't know is Ben Shapiro's media company thing. An alternate title for the video could have just been "Straight White Christian Conservative Complains About Representation." Before I really get ripping into this video, I want to set it up with a good bit of context. Now, first of all, I'm not super comfortable talking about religion. The only reason that I'm bringing up the fact that she's Christian in this video is because it is relevant to the context. I have no intention of being disrespectful to anyone of any religion. I also don't love talking about my own religion or spiritual beliefs or anything under that umbrella that much. I just feel like regardless of which way I fall, it in some way discredits me to some people. If I come out and say I am Christian, then to some people it's going to seem like I am just making this video to trash talk another Christian to save face and say not all Christians are bad. If I come out and say I'm not Christian, then to some people it's going to look like I'm just using this to trash talk Christians. I want to promise you that neither of those things are the case, and so I'm going to leave my own beliefs out of this in regards to religion. So if you know anything about me in real life, or even just if you know me online, one of the first things you'll probably learn about me is that I love comic books. I love comic book related things. That's probably the longest standing obsession I have. Another thing that you probably know about me is that I am proudly the most stereotypical long-haired, pink-haired hippie commie. If you can't tell by the flag behind me and the two comic books on my wall, I'm very much into queer rights, queer representation. So at the very least, maybe this video will lead to some good conversations about why you shouldn't be sad that not everyone on this screen looks like you. We've had a long time. We can let some other people occasionally have the spotlight. So without any further ado, let's get to Mummy, there are strange people on my screen, and I am frightened.
The plot of Eternals, gosh, it is just a mess. To start with, what we have essentially are some eternal beings created by the great energy god, Arishem, and they are there to defeat some other creatures that he made. It's both complicated and boring.
Immediately I have a problem. Some of my problems are hypocrisy from her being a Christian. Some of my problems are issues that I have with people in regards to their views on my rights. Some of the views I have are just comic book nerd things. But the thing I take issue with, right off the bat, is that you can make anything sound super dumb if you simplify it enough. So this is when there was no political controversy surrounding the Marvel Universe, despite the fact that comic books are just inherently political. So this movie is drunk man gets captured by army, builds robot, violently escapes, American hero. Anything can sound dumb if you simplify it enough.
The wokeness in Eternals is pretty heavy, and one of the most obvious ways that you're going to see that is the cast. The Eternals, these created guardians of mankind, come in all genders, colors, sexuality, and ability.
So this is the part that I really focused on in the TikTok that I was talking about. The wokeness is pretty heavy because the cast is diverse, which if we had an explanation for it, it would be fine. Queer people, people of color, disabled people don't owe you an excuse for being there. Marginalized people don't have to have any reason to exist. Saying that something is woke because they have a diverse cast is immediately saying that you don't understand why not everyone on the screen looks like you, and that bothers you. And honestly, I think it comes from a fear, a concern of not being the majority in media one day. I saw something online, I don't know how true this statistic is, but it said something like 10% of characters on like current running TV are some way LGBT. I don't really see the issue in that, because for a long time, there has been no representation. When I grew up, the only representation, the only people I saw on the screen, whether it was TV or on the big screen, were people who were the punchline. It was just a bunch of man in a dress jokes.
No explanation for why the god Archie decided to make one of the Eternals a deaf girl, why one is a child of indeterminate gender, why some are minority women, and there's no explanation given for that. And it's frustrating. As you watch the movie, you go, I don't understand. Why did he do this? Also, we have LGBT representation in this film. For the first time, it's quite overt.
This is the first time that we have seen an openly queer character that we know is queer in the MCU. This is, however, not the first queer character in the MCU. They had filmed a scene with Tessa Thompson, Valkyrie, where it confirmed that she is bisexual. This was at some point announced or maybe leaked, and a lot of people were really excited about it. There's a lot of queer Marvel fans. Even though there was hype around that scene, it was cut. The fact that it was cut very clearly states, we don't care about your representation. What we care more about is the money from the people who don't want to see people like you on screen. Valkyrie, Loki, Korg, all in some way queer. And Thor is considered like the god of lesbians. If you have problems with queer people, you have problems with Marvel. Think that WandaVision didn't have any queer representation? You're kinda right, but not really. One of the biggest power couples in Marvel Comics is Wiccan and Hulkling. You know who Wiccan is? Wanda's kid. We're everywhere. We always have been. You just didn't want to notice us.
We have a gay Black Eternal superhero, Phastos, and he has a male partner and a child, and that actually features somewhat prominently in the movie.
When she says that it features somewhat prominently, Phastos just mentions his husband. You do see him on the screen. You know, he is a part of the movie. I'm not trying to say that he was only briefly mentioned, but he wasn't prominently featured. He was very much a background character. So were the kids. Basically, the only role that his husband and his kids played was to portray hero worship in the MCU and to show kind of like the interactions between Hawkeye and his wife, the concern that a spouse can have for these heroes. So to say that it's prominently featured, it's just not. You just focused really hard on it.
So that is a really big turn from Marvel, particularly given how much this franchise appeals to families. I think there's no doubt that there are some families who are going to forego this film because of that.
Now is when I want to ask the question, why are families going to forego this movie simply because there is a gay character featured? The answer that I often get is something along the lines of kids don't need to know about sexuality. I totally agree that we shouldn't be forcing sexuality down kids' throats. The only sex scene in that movie was two straight people, though. She does mention that later, but pretty briefly. They're not thinking about sex when they see gay people. You are. My existence is not inherently sexual. These people will say, I don't want them forcing sexuality down my kid's throat. And then they'll look at a toddler and call him a ladies' man. Do you have a girlfriend yet, 2-year-old? I agree that we shouldn't be sexualizing children. Obviously, that would be a weird thing to do. So why are you asking your 2-year-old if he's a ladies' man? If he has girlfriends? He's 2. I'm passing no judgment on people who say things like that. I don't think there's any malicious intent when people say things like that. What I'm saying is that if you're gonna look at me and automatically think of sex, I'm not the one sexualizing anything.
They didn't start that way in the comic book. There was a lot of race swapping, gender swapping going on here with this cast. And again, there was really no explanation about why they did this other than for the sake of representation.
That is true. They did do that. They did that with Valkyrie. They did that. Nick Fury was originally white. He's still white. I mean, one of the Nick Furies is white. There's been gender swapping. There's been race swapping the whole time. You didn't care. You still don't care that it's happening. You just cared that there are people who don't look like you on the screen. If you're mad about them swapping race or gender, where was your outrage when they cast Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One? I don't remember hearing any conservatives complaining about that. And this is the biggest point that I made in that TikTok. The reason I keep bringing up that she's a Christian is because her complaint here is that she doesn't think that it's realistic that a god would create a planet where all of the different people look different. Some are disabled, some are women, some are queer, some are white, some are black. She doesn't think that it's realistic that a god would create a planet like that. And she's a Christian. Again, I have zero complaints about the fact that she's a Christian. But if you believe that a god created this planet and created all of the different people on it, white, black, man, woman, why do you find it hard to believe that a god could create a planet where everyone's different? White, black, man, woman. There are certain inconsistencies I'm noticing.
Kevin Feige has been pretty explicit that he plans to take the Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe pretty explicitly woke.
Seeing people on screen that aren't straight white men is not wokeness. They're not pushing anything on anyone. There was no underlying meaning to Phastos existing in Eternals. There was no breakdown where they were like, gay is okay. There wasn't. And you know what? That's fine. Take your time, Marvel Studios. These people existing is not a statement. We exist in real life, everywhere. Acknowledging the existence of other people is not wokeness.
That they are going to look for more opportunities to develop minority and female superheroes. And he's not talking about any of this in service to the story. He's really saying it very explicitly that we are just doing it for the sake of identity politics.
Tony Stark is white. Tony Stark is a straight white man. Him being white doesn't add to the story. Him being a man doesn't add to the story. Plot-wise, there is no reason for Tony Stark to be a straight white man. This is the same argument being used in this video. Sexuality or race or gender does not have to play into the plot. That's actually like the whole point, because someone's identity does not have to play into the plot for it to exist. It's just a dumb argument. I'm sorry.
And part of the reason that we didn't see it sooner was I really do think that Disney executives, basically because of the bottom line, were resisting that.
She is actually right. The only reason that representation has not existed in the MCU is because they didn't want it to affect their bottom line. And there have been people who are upset about that, myself included. I would love to see myself in these movies. It's not happening. The people who have been ignored, the people who have not been represented, we've basically been patient this whole time. But the people who have been way overrepresented are threatening to boycott because other people are being represented. It's wild. Before I say this next thing, I want to say that if you just like the movies and you don't like the comics, that's totally fine. I try to talk about comic book movies in context of what it means like in the comics, but I always try to do it in a way where people who don't know much about the comics can still understand it. But one thing that most people who only have the tiniest bit of knowledge about comic books knows is that comic books do try to represent their audience. There's even a great quote by Stan Lee.
Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window. That world may change and evolve, Those stories have room for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or color of their skin. The only things we don't have room for are hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. And we all come together in the body of Marvel. Excelsior!
That is Stan Lee himself. Without this man, we wouldn't have had any of these movies. Saying that representation matters, and he always wants to do his best to represent his audience as times change. That was not that long ago. So people complaining about representation in comics, they don't know much about comics. Which again, if you don't know much about comics is fine. But if you don't know much about comics, don't try to base your complaints on the comics. That's something I really noticed, especially with the really controversial issue of Superman, Son of Kal-El. The people who were complaining about it were people who very clearly didn't know anything about it. They were angry because Superman is straight, Clark Kent is straight. The most intro-level DC fan knows that Kal-El is Superman, Kal-El is Clark Kent. So if the comic book is called Son of Kal-El, that's about John Kent. That little gay boy is John Kent. If you don't know about the comics, don't try to argue about the comics.
Because certainly, not the average film goers in flyover country, they're not clamoring to see a lot of gay representation in their superhero movies that they take their kids to.
That is just wrong. There's a huge push for representation, which is why they did it. We agreed earlier that the only reason they didn't have representation is because they didn't want it to affect their bottom line. They didn't want to lose money from the outrage. There's a lot to say about rainbow capitalism, but ultimately, rainbow capitalism is when a company decides that being accepting or representing this community is now profitable for them. They're not doing it because they care about us, and we know that. They're doing it because it's now profitable. So if your argument is that they're only doing it for the money, but then a couple minutes later your argument is that think of how this is going to affect your money, that's also kind of conflicting.
And to be quite fair, I think that if Eternals had not had the gay character, had it not had so many minority characters, had it not had a disabled character, I don't even think it would have scored the lowest in the MCU, 48% Rotten Tomatoes score that it did score, because it was really just that poor of a movie.
It would have scored much higher. The only criticisms I've heard from straight people have been gay people bad. Gay people bad. Gay people bad. If you remove the thing that is outraging these people, then you remove the low ratings that these people gave. Was Eternals my favorite MCU movie? Nowhere close. This is not something that is on Endgame level or No Way Home level, and no one expected it to be. But ultimately, if you're comparing this and Thor: The Dark World, there's no contest. Eternals wins. The only reason this is rated low is because there's representation, and that makes people uncomfortable.
I don't think the average guy who started out in 2008 watching Iron Man, who buys the comic books, I don't think he was dying for gay representation.
I just don't think people realize how gay comic books are. There is so much gay in comic books. Comic book fans are clamoring for this.
What they're banking on is the idea that you're already a fan, you've already given us so much of your time and money, you're going to go ahead and stick with us, even though we're starting to put that sort of thing into our films, even though we're starting to push an agenda.
This is a question to fellow members of the community. Have y'all received y'all's gay agenda? Because I still haven't gotten mine, and I've been out for a decade. I'm starting to get worried.
I love diversity for the right reasons. If it's organic to the story, I think a lot of people are excited about Shang-Chi because it was organic to that story. It was an Asian-based story. It made sense to emphasize that culture.
Right. And I do think it's important to show those cultures. I think it's important to show different cultures because Not every person is going to have the same culture. We can agree there. However, like I've said a million times, marginalized groups don't have to give you an excuse to exist. Not every Asian person is going to be super in touch with the culture of their ancestors. So saying that they should only be represented when it makes sense to the story, when you think that that movie makes sense in regards to their culture, that's when they're allowed to exist on screen. It's not a good look.
A lot of people were excited about Black Panther for the same reason. You didn't see audiences go, oh, I don't want to see a black superhero.
You didn't see that. You weren't looking. There was plenty of racism surrounding Black Panther. Ultimately, it got drowned out, which I'm grateful for. I don't mind diversity. I liked Black Panther. That seems like a very tokenizing argument. That seems very, I'm not racist, I have a black friend. I'm not homophobic. I met a gay person at a bar once. It seems like you're keeping that movie in your back pocket to be able to pull out in case anyone says anything about you criticizing diversity. It's also not a good look. It's funny that when Bucky became the White Wolf, when Bucky was very in with Wakanda, people didn't really have a problem. If the complaint is that it doesn't make sense to mix these cultures, for example, Eternals, there are too many different skin tones, it doesn't make sense, then why would you be okay with Bucky being in Wakanda? I don't know if you noticed this, but he looks a little different than most of the characters from Wakanda.
You know, it's funny. It really tells us how much these identity politics have come to dominate just every cultural conversation. Because in 1998, when Wesley Snipes came out in Blade, nobody was talking about, oh, hey, we have a black superhero.
If we had some explanation about that might be fine.
I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Why was he black? It's just woke culture. If Blade didn't already exist as a movie and they released Mahershala Ali's Blade, people would be livid that there's a black character. I want to know how I know that. Because they're livid that there's a
Black superhero.
black character. She keeps contradicting herself. I can disagree with someone and have a perfectly fine conversation. My issue comes with inconsistency. If you believe that diversity in a movie is unbelievable because not all characters are tied to their culture, but then you believe this movie is fine even though the movie isn't about this person's culture, it doesn't make sense. These views conflict with one another.
It just wasn't on our radar. And unfortunately, I do think the fact that it became such a big deal for Black Panther tells us how much ground we've lost in erasing these distinctions of black, white, identity groups.
Did this woman just, I don't see color, us? You were just talking about how much you appreciated Black Panther because it was diverse. You said that I think diversity is a good thing, and then you brought up Black Panther as your example. You then turn around to say that you think it's a bad thing that people celebrated the diversity in Black Panther. Make it make sense.
There's so little that we enjoy just for fun's sake now, right? Now you have to enjoy it because you're furthering some cause or you're lending your voice to some movement.
No, you don't. That's the whole thing. You don't have to enjoy it for these things. You don't have to celebrate that Fastos is gay. You just have to accept it. Do you want to know the entire statement that I, a huge Marvel fan, a very openly queer person, very loud advocate for my community, do you want to know everything I said about Fastos when I left that theater? Oh, cool, he has a husband. I didn't go out celebrating. I didn't walk out of my house with a pride flag sticking out of my... I just looked at the screen, said, oh, cool, someone like me, and then I moved on. And the thing is, I am a white dude. I see people who look like me everywhere in media. Imagine like a gay black woman. Name a character who is a gay black woman. Name a character who's a straight white man. You don't have to celebrate it. You don't have to act like it's a big deal. just accept it. We're not the ones making a big deal about it.
So the question of China and Marvel is a very fraught, complicated question right now. The last few Marvel movies have not released in China. Maybe that's part of the reason that they went ahead and took the risk of leaning so far into the diversity marketing. That film was likely not going to get a release in the Chinese box office. It seems like the big Chinese dollars that studios like Disney have relied on so heavily are suddenly drying up.
Rare point where she's right. I think that Marvel has kind of laid back a lot on worrying whether they are going to get released in China. This is a conversation that I've had a lot. A lot of people, myself included, were theorizing that Mephisto was going to be the main villain at the end of WandaVision. And a lot of people who disagreed with that, one of their main arguments was that they're not going to do that because if they're trying to make Mephisto a big bad in the MCU, they've pretty much got to kiss Chinese dollars goodbye. It is a conversation that's being had a lot, whether Marvel is going to continue to try getting their movies released in China. And I do think she's right that that's part of the reason why they did decide to go ahead with Fastos.
So the question of censorship and the Marvel universe hasn't really been something that's come up a lot. In Avengers, one of the men mentioned a husband. In Russia, that dialogue was changed to make that man heterosexual. I don't know how they're going to be able to navigate that going forward. So I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to just, change a little bit of the dubbing or slice a little piece. If they think they're already not going to get a release anyway, there's probably not going to be any censoring because I don't know how they're going to get around it.
Aren't conservatives very against censoring?
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
From pushing the diversity angle to possibly making a diversity hire in the director's chair, what we're seeing from beginning to end is that this wasn't a good choice.
You just showed a picture featuring a blue man.
If we had some explanation for that, might be fine.
He's blue. How was that relevant to the story?
It's not going to be a good choice for them going forward into this phase 4 of the MCU. From both critics and your average moviegoer, it's the lowest ranking movie in Marvel history.
Because people are mad about diversity. If I somehow broke into the industry and the main criticism about me was that I was too inclusive, I would be so proud of that. That means I'm doing something right.
This obsession they have now with promising them that they're going to get representation, it's not off to a good start. People didn't sign up for Marvel for this. People signed up for Captain America. People signed up for Iron Man and Spider-Man. I don't think they're going to sign up for two men kissing. Part of the reason that this franchise did so well is because it was one of the few types of movies that everyone could still go and enjoy together. It was still an example of the shared common culture we still had. When they're breaking that apart and making it yet another point in the political battle, when they're making it yet another political commentary, people don't want to pay money for that. People don't want to spend their time on that. If they don't change course, if the wake-up call of Eternal's very bad scores and pretty mediocre box office doesn't shake some sense into them, I think this will be the end of the Marvel Universe as we knew it.
So that was the whole video. I've only got a few more things to add. Number one, shortly after that film released, their very next film ended up being, I believe, the highest grossing film of all time. If not, it was one of the highest grossing films of all time. The MCU is not going anywhere in the foreseeable future. I mean, the comics have been around forever. They've almost gone under several times. But people's love for these characters has been one of the things that has helped them keep floating. There are other factors to it, obviously. But people do love these characters. And if you are an actual fan of Marvel, an actual fan of comic books, then seeing representation on the screen is not going to upset you, because that is what Marvel is about. One of her main points was people bring their kids to see these movies. Well, first of all, they're pretty much all rated PG-13. There's going to be an R-rated one soon, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's not safe for kids. That's not what I'm saying. If the excessive violence and war crimes doesn't turn you off of it, why does a gay person existing turn you off of it? Additionally, like I said, literal sex scene in that movie. And you saw how much time she spent talking about gay people bad versus literal sex scene. If it was really about the kids, you would have been much more upset about that sex scene. The last thing I want to leave you with, we don't want representation to upset you. We don't want representation to hurt your feelings. We don't want to be included to ruin your good time. And our inclusion doesn't ruin your good time. If you're looking at the screen and you're getting upset because there are people like me on the screen, that's all on you. I have done nothing in that situation. Our inclusion does not exclude you. So when you get online and you're talking about why you're upset because you saw people like me, it's extremely selfish. It's ignorant. Seeing things like that used to genuinely hurt me and upset me. But what's even worse is that it doesn't anymore. Because I'm so used to it. Just stop being upset when there are different kinds of people represented on screen. Because we have done nothing to you.